I never planned for things to turn out this way. My life looked perfect from the outside, but inside I was quietly suffocating. My marriage had lost its warmth, its spark, the small moments that once made me feel seen. My husband barely noticed me anymore. His mind was always elsewhere. Work, obligations, endless distractions. Nights were silent, mornings mechanical. I became invisible, reduced to a shadow moving around him, longing for just a glance of affection that never came. That was when I began noticing him. He wasn't supposed to matter, just someone who lingered at the edges of my world, but his presence grew heavier every day. He looked at me in a way no one else did anymore. His eyes lingered just long enough to remind me that I still existed, that I was still a woman worth noticing. At first, I ignored it. I told myself I was overthinking, that my heart was inventing things out of hunger. But the more I tried to look away, the more I felt drawn in. Every casual encounter felt charged. A brush of his hand when passing something to me, a pause in conversation that stretched longer than it should, the unspoken electricity between us that only deepened with silence. I would replay those small moments at night, lying next to my husband's still body, asking myself why the thought of another man's glance kept me awake while my own marriage left me numb. I started to notice the way his voice dropped when he spoke just to me, the way his smile lingered like a secret. It terrified me, and yet, I couldn't resist feeding it. I found myself dressing with more care, not for my husband, but for him. A touch of perfume, a shade of lipstick I hadn't worn in years. Small rebellions against the dullness of my married life. Each choice was a silent whisper of longing. He never rushed. That was what made it dangerous. He wasn't obvious, wasn't careless. He allowed the tension to grow, to wrap itself around us until it was impossible to ignore. A compliment murmured in passing, words that felt too intimate for the setting we stood in, glances that seemed to strip away everything polite and ordinary. With each moment, I felt my defenses weaken. I told myself I was strong, that I knew the boundaries, that I would never cross a line. But every boundary felt thinner, every promise I made to myself shakier than the last. I began craving the moments when he was near, seeking excuses for our paths to cross. My body betrayed me with every stolen heartbeat, every quiet anticipation. The most dangerous part wasn't his touch, it was the fact that he hadn't touched me yet. It was the waiting, the imagining, the way my own mind filled in the silence with what I wanted. Desire bloomed like a secret I could no longer contain. I wasn't just tempted, I was already falling, even before admitting it to myself. And one day, when our eyes met longer than they should have, I realized there was no turning back. Something had already begun, and I was no longer the same woman I had been before that I told myself 1,000 times to stop before it went too far, but temptation has a way of disguising itself as inevitability. The more I resisted, the stronger it pulled me in. That day, it happened almost too easily. My husband was away, and the house felt emptier than usual. He came by for something small, an excuse I could barely remember later, but the air between us felt heavier than it ever had before. Every word we exchanged carried something unsaid, and I could feel it pressing against me like a storm waiting to break. I tried to act normal. I forced smiles, casual tones, gestures that pretended nothing was stirring inside me. But the silence between our words was louder than anything I could say. When his eyes held mine for a beat too long, I felt my defenses collapse in an instant. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. His gaze asked questions my heart already knew the answers to, and suddenly, all the walls I had built seemed useless. He stepped closer, not enough to touch, but enough for me to feel him. My pulse quickened, my breath grew shallow. I told myself to stop, to pull away, to keep this from happening, but my body refused to obey. I could feel myself leaning toward him, betraying everything I had promised myself, betraying the life I had built. His voice was low when he finally spoke, and the words weren't even dangerous on their own. It was the way he said them, the quiet intensity, the unspoken permission wrapped inside them. I didn't answer out loud. My silence was enough, my trembling was enough, the way I stayed instead of walking away was enough. When it happened, it wasn't sudden or rushed. It was slow, deliberate, the breaking of a dam I had held back for far too long. His hand brushed mine, and I didn't pull away. I should have, every part of me knew I should have, but I didn't. That single touch ignited everything I had been trying to bury, and before I could think, I was lost. The first kiss was nothing like I expected. It wasn't wild or careless, it was devastating in its tenderness, the kind that felt like both a question and an answer. I knew it was wrong, every part of me screamed it, but I couldn't stop. I didn't want to stop. For the first time in years, I felt alive. My heart raced, my body burned, my soul woke up from a sleep I hadn't realized I was trapped in. I told myself it was just one mistake, just one moment, but even as I thought it, I knew I was lying. The way I clung to him, the way I breathed him in, the way I surrendered, it wasn't a single slip. It was a choice, a conscious surrender to something forbidden yet irresistible. By the time I pulled away, it was already too late. I could feel the weight of what I had done, but also the intoxicating rush of what it meant. I wasn't the woman I had been that morning. Something had shifted, something irreversible. And when I finally whispered his name, trembling and breathless, I knew there would be no going back. The line had been crossed, and with it, the life I once knew had shattered into something unrecognizable. After that first time, there was no undoing it. A single moment had unraveled everything, and I found myself living in a world split in two. At home, I wore the mask of a devoted wife, moving through routines and conversations as though nothing had changed. But beneath that surface, I carried a secret that burned inside me, a double life hidden in plain sight. Every stolen glance, every chance meeting with him became fuel for the fire we had lit. Messages disguised as ordinary words carried meanings only the two of us understood. A simple "I'll see you soon" was no longer innocent. It was a promise, a confession, a whisper that replayed in my mind long after it was sent. My phone became a lifeline, each vibration pulling me into a world where I still felt desired, alive, wanted. We learned to be careful. To everyone else, we were nothing more than acquaintances, maybe friends. But in the quiet corners of our lives, behind closed doors and drawn curtains, we allowed ourselves to exist without restraint. Each meeting grew heavier with emotion, every embrace more desperate than the last. What began as curiosity quickly became addiction. I found myself craving his presence with a hunger I couldn't explain. But desire never comes without its shadows. The guilt followed me everywhere. I would sit across from my husband at dinner, nodding at his words, pretending to listen, while inside I drowned in shame. Sometimes I caught myself watching his face, wondering if he could see it written in my eyes, if he sensed the betrayal I carried. Each time he looked at me without suspicion, my heart twisted even more. I hated myself for what I was doing, and yet the thought of stopping felt unbearable. There were moments when the danger nearly consumed us. Once, I thought I heard footsteps approaching as we whispered in the dark, and panic surged through me like fire. Another time, a friend asked why I seemed so distracted, and I laughed it off while my pulse raced. Every close call should have been a warning, but instead, it only made us more reckless. The risk fed the passion, turning every encounter into something sharper, more intoxicating. I started to see the world differently. Ordinary places became dangerous because they held memories of him. A certain street corner, a room, even a phrase could send me spiraling back into his arms in my mind. The affair wasn't just a part of my life anymore, it was shaping it, consuming it, rewriting the way I existed. At night, lying beside my husband, I would close my eyes and imagine the other life I was living. I would remember the way I felt when I was with him. Like every nerve in my body was awake, like I was finally being seen. And then the guilt would creep back in, heavy and suffocating, reminding me that every kiss was a lie, every touch a betrayal. Yet even with the weight of it all pressing on me, I couldn't bring myself to end it. The thought of walking away from him felt like losing air, like giving up the one thing that made me feel alive. I knew it couldn't last. I knew secrets like this never stay hidden forever. But in those moments, none of that mattered. What mattered was the way he looked at me, the way he made me feel, the way I had already crossed too far to ever turn back. In the quiet aftermath of every stolen moment, the truth pressed down heavier than ever. I had built two lives that could never exist together, and every day I felt the distance between them growing. At home, I played the part expected of me, speaking softly, smiling when required, living as though nothing had changed. But inside, I was fractured. I carried the taste of forbidden love, the memory of his hands, the echo of promises we never dared to speak out loud. There were mornings when I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes carried secrets too heavy, her smile was practiced, her heart divided. The guilt clawed at me relentlessly. I would sit across from my husband, listening to his words, watching him carry on with no idea of the betrayal sleeping beside him each night. His kindness made it worse. He didn't suspect, didn't accuse, he trusted me. And that trust was a knife I couldn't pull from my chest. But just when guilt threatened to swallow me whole, the memory of him would surface. The way he made me feel alive, the way his presence shook me awake from years of numbness. It was intoxicating, irresistible, a drug I couldn't quit. No matter how hard I tried to convince myself to stop, one look from him, one accidental brush of his hand, and I was lost again. Desire and shame tangled inside me until I could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. The danger never left my mind. Every ring of the phone, every unexpected knock at the door sent waves of panic rushing through me. I lived in constant fear that someone would see too much, that the truth would come crashing into the open. And yet, beneath that fear, there was another secret thought I couldn't ignore. Part of me wanted it. Part of me wondered what it would feel like if everything were exposed, if I no longer had to pretend. The burden became unbearable in moments of silence. Late at night, lying next to my husband, I would stare at the ceiling and wonder what I had done to myself. Had I ruined everything for a fleeting taste of passion? Or had I finally discovered a part of me I had been denying for too long? There were no answers, only the relentless pounding of my heart, torn between love, betrayal, and an ache that refused to let go. The last time we met, the air between us felt different. He touched my hand, and instead of calm, I felt an ache, a sorrow, as though we both knew something was slipping away. He whispered that we had to be careful, that we couldn't keep walking this path forever. His words should have been final, but instead, they deepened the ache in me. I didn't want careful. I didn't want silence. I wanted him, even if it destroyed everything. And when I returned home that night, my husband looked at me with tired but gentle eyes. He asked how my day had been, his voice soft, filled with trust one no longer deserved. I forced a smile, gave him a simple answer, but inside, my heart was screaming. I couldn't tell him. I couldn't confess. I could only sit there, pretending, while the secret burned deeper into me. I don't know what will happen next. Maybe it will end, maybe it will continue, maybe it will one day explode into the light where no lies can hide. But one truth I cannot deny, no matter how wrong, no matter how dangerous, I still want him. And wanting him has become the one thing I can't escape.